June 23rd, just a few short weeks ago. It had been a long day in the White House press office, and White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders gathered together with some friends, and they all decided to go eat at this cute little restaurant in Lexington, Virginia called the Red Hen. They sat down, and their order for appetizers was taken, a cheese plate, apparently, if you read the papers. But by the time that had happened, a bit of a stir had started to happen in the back kitchen with the servers and the cooks. They recognized who Sarah was, and they started to feel a little uncomfortable about doing business with her. And they wanted to ask her to leave, but nobody wanted to do it themselves. So they called up the owner of the Red Hen, Stephanie Wilkinson, and said, "You're never going to believe who's here. And we're really not too happy about it, and we don't want to give her any more service." And Ms. Wilkinson listened to their complaints and their concerns and said, "Yeah, you're right, and don't worry about it. I'll come down and I'll take care of it." And so Stephanie Wilkinson came down to her restaurant and walked up to Huckabee Sanders' table with her party and said, "I'm sorry, but we're not comfortable serving you here, given what we know about you and what you do in your role as the president's press secretary. We'd like you to leave now. We're not going to serve you this evening." And they said, "Okay." And they got up and left. They said, "Let's at least pay you for the appetizers." She said, No, it's on the house. Just go. Just get out." As moments of protest go, it was pretty calm and pretty civil on the face of it, at least in the popular sense of the word. And then the news got out, and a significant of the portion of the country collectively lost their minds over the episode. The restaurant had to shut down for about 2 weeks. Protesters from all over the country arrived on the block to protest the restaurant, but also protest homosexuality, religious intolerance, well, not a religious intolerance, but religious fundamentalism, racial purity. Protesters of all sorts came out. It was kind of a carnival atmosphere around the Red Hen of various, let's call them nasty ideas. Some of them in competition with one another. One of the stories in the paper reporting about the protests outside the Red Hen mentioned that the guys who were carrying the Confederate flags marching around outside took very special care to cross the street away from the LGBT haters who were stomping on an American flag to protest homosexuality in the country because, quote unquote, we don't want to have anything to do with that religious bigotry stuff. It was like an SNL sketch was writing itself outside in draft form, the Red Hen. And then another portion of the country picked up on this sense that maybe it was okay to harass members of the administration while they sat down to eat in various restaurants around the D.C. area, and that's indeed what was happening. People were following Kirstjen Nielsen and Scott Pruitt and Betsy DeVos and Mitch McConnell to places where they would eat in D.C. and just berate them, yell their complaints at them, not let them eat at peace, to the point where they had to get up and leave the restaurants. And the outcry became, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to act with so much hate towards people we disagree? Why can't we be civil? Why is there so much incivility? And it's an interesting question on the face of it. Why can't we be civil? Well, what are we asking for exactly when we ask for civility in these times? The popular conception of civility is that it's just politeness for politeness' sake. It's the unspoken rule of the Thanksgiving dinner table that we do not talk about politics and we do not talk about religion. We just don't talk about these things because they might lead into arguments and fights. And dear God, we don't want that. So let's just not engage in the topics. Let's not talk about uncomfortable things. Let's just be nice to each other for a change. All the time, just niceness, politeness. But friends, that is not civility. That is not what civility means. Civility in its deepest sense is the way we come together across all of our diversity and disagreements and beliefs to build a community together. And sometimes it's messy. And sometimes it's not polite. But the goal of civility is the creation of a set of standards for how we come together, all of us, how we build a community. And if that is civility, then I would suggest that civility in all its forms is being demolished piece by piece, day by day, by people in the highest corridors of power. When we normalize the most vile ideas in our national conversation, there is no civility there. When those ideas include the annihilation of entire peoples because of who they are, there is no civility there. And when we say that those are very fine people expressing those ideas, we are dismantling civility. When we lay blame for our ills on entire classes of people, be they from other countries, be they lesbians, gays, bisexuals, be they people of different religions. When we are naming classes of people on a daily basis who maybe should not belong to civilization, we are dismantling civility. Civility is being demolished. We are living in uncivil times. Incivility is the new normal. It has become, for all intents and purposes, the law of the land. And it's crazy-making. And it's anger-inducing. Who here besides me has a hard time sleeping at night lately? Yeah. I had about 3 hours last night just getting ready for this thing. What was my point? Incivility is the water we are swimming in as a nation right now. It is the truth that we have to deal with. And so when someone asks us to be civil as we express this anger that we are feeling over what is going on, and let's be clear, I am not hateful of anyone. I am angry about what people are doing. And when we give words to that anger, and people ask us to be civil, what they're really asking is, can't you just ignore it? It would be much more comfortable for me personally if you would just disengage from the topic completely and not talk about it anymore because it really makes me uncomfortable. And when those who are dismantling civility piece by piece by piece, day by day, ask us to be civil, what they're asking us to do is to play by the rules that they've already destroyed. The rules that are no longer in effect. So the question to my mind this morning isn't should we be civil or not? It's how do we, when we are living in uncivil times, when we're left with little choice but to engage with incivility all around us, how do we live up to our values and our ideals amidst incivility? Can we be uncivil and live up to our higher purpose? Can we use incivility as a force for transformation, as a force for building something new? Spoiler alert, the answer is yes. But there is a challenge to it, and the challenge comes from that place of anger that I'm talking about. Because anger, to quote the Jedi, leads to hatred very, very easily. We can slip into that hateful place so easily when we glom onto that anger and we hold onto it. So how do we take that anger and use it as something transformative and use it as some sort of guidepost for how we are to live up to our higher selves in uncivil times? It's not easy. It wasn't that long ago I stood up in front of you and talked about my struggles with the question as to whether or not it was okay to punch a Nazi in the face. And my answer that day after 20 minutes was, I don't know. Maybe? And I still don't have a better answer for you today. I'm not entirely uncertain. If faced with somebody throwing that much hate out into my community, I might not, sucker punch the guy. But maybe the better response is to laugh at the Nazi instead. Maybe it's better to laugh. Laughter, after all, as they say, is the best medicine, and that's not just a cliche. There's been enough neurological study now to show us that laughter releases all those lovely endorphins that help us to heal a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. So if I can laugh at the utterly ridiculous, if I can shift my vantage point to that is horrifying, to that is just ridiculously stupid, and laugh at it, I can start to channel some of that anger into a little bit of a healing power. I can start to find a way to use it constructively. That's the effect that laughter has on us as we laugh. And on the flip side, there's the effect that laughter has upon the person being laughed at when they are being ridiculous. It throws them off balance. I'm going to tell a story on my daughter right now, and I apologize in advance. When Nora was in her terrible twos phase, which actually didn't start till about 3, she was the master of the tantrum. Injustice lay in every corner, and she was ready to tell you about it at the top of her lungs, at the drop of a hat. Good Lord, she was an artiste of the tantrum. And for a long time, Jess and I didn't know quite how to handle it. Until one day, the tantrum got so bad and so red-faced, and it was over something so trivial, and it was so ridiculous, that we just started to laugh. Sitting in our living room in Milwaukee, watching our daughter get redder and redder in the face, flailing about and screaming and crying over, I don't even remember what it was at that point, but it was something just dumb. And we laughed. And we laughed, and we laughed a ton. And Nora kind of stopped, because this was not the response she was going for when she started the tantrum. And she got mad about the laughter for a little bit and realized that that wasn't helping anything because we were just laughing all the harder. And finally, she just kind of stopped. Went back to her room. Left, just gave up on the whole crusade for whatever it was, goldfish cracker or something, I don't know. We didn't take her seriously, and she gave up. And that's the moral of the story of our folks down in Knoxville, Tennessee. That is absolutely a true story. There was a white power march through the streets. It was not all Klansmen. That's just a nice little visual shorthand for people to know who was in town and what was at stake. But it was white supremacists of all tribes with their hateful, horrible idea of one race being superior to another, of other races being worthy of just annihilation from community because of who they were, People who espouse those ideas, when they march them through the street, they want to be taken seriously. They want their idea to be entered into the marketplace of ideas and have it debated in the public square in the hopes that they will convert people and the hopes that they will win. And if they provoke an emotional response in the process, that's okay too. And the one they're hoping for is anger. They're hoping for outrage. They're hoping I'll get mad enough to throw that sucker punch. But when you come around the corner in the public square and there's just a whole troop of clowns waiting for you, mocking your every word, tossing flowers in the air, not taking you seriously, you have lost control of the debate that you are trying to have a high stake in. And you go away. Humor has immense power. The jesters of the world throughout history had an immense amount of power. They were the ones who could speak to the king, give the king bad news, speak truth in a way that can be heard. And that's what all the best comics do today. They tell hard truth in ways that make it easy to swallow and absorb. You may not be converted, you may not believe it right away, but it's hitting your brain in channels that make it easier to take. The best comics do that. Patton Oswald is one of my current favorites. I would argue he has done more to make it easy in this country to talk about mental health issues in the way that he talks about his own struggles with depression than any other professional mental health advocate in the country. Because he makes you laugh as he does it, and he tells truth as he does it, and he changes the way we talk about something. Now, nobody wants to be mocked. Nobody wants to be made fun of. But let's be honest, there are some people who need to be knocked off their axis every once in a while, me included. We need to be reminded not to take ourselves so seriously, and we need to be knocked off our axis, especially when we are headed down dark, dark paths. We need the jesters of the world, and it's helpful to be one of the jesters if you have that talent. Because sometimes the people in power need to hear bad news. Even when that bad news is, you're kind of being a terrible person right now and you are doing terrible things.
I actually really like Sarah. I think she's very resourceful, but she burns facts, and then she uses that ash to create a perfect smoky eye. But maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's lies. It's probably lies.
That was one of Michelle Wolf's tamer jokes at this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner. I had to be very, very selective in how I cut that. Michelle Wolf, like Stephen Colbert before her several years back, doing the brave, brave jester thing of standing on the dais next to the center of power, or whoever is standing into the center of power in that moment, and telling them truth. In the form of a joke, but telling truth. The truth in this instance, of course, is that Sarah Huckabee Sanders lies a lot. It's apparently her job. That is not an endorsement of any kind. That is a fact that I will not burn. Michelle Wolf got up on the stage and told hard truth, gave the bad news, and continued to give the bad news over and over again. And the crowd in the audience that night, most of it made up of members of the White House press corps and their extended networks of people, were right there with her until she kept on telling the bad news, telling the hard truth.
You guys are obsessed with Trump. Did you used to date him? Because you pretend like you hate him, but I think you love him. I think what no one in this room wants to admit is that Trump has helped all of you. He couldn't sell steaks or vodka or water or college or ties or Eric. But he has helped you. He's helped you sell your papers and your books and your TV. You helped create this monster and now you're profiting off of him. And if you're gonna profit off of Trump, you should at least give him some money because he doesn't have any.
Oddly enough, this is the point where the audience turned on her. Because now she was telling hard truth to the people who had invited her to get up on that dais and speak in the first place. And that is a hard truth. And that is the role of the jester, and that is the role of public ridicule, and why it is so necessary in our society, and why it is such a powerful tool in uncivil times. The jester in their work of ridicule tells truth to power, hopefully in a way that they can hear it. Now, did the centers of power in that room that night hear every truth that Michelle Wolf had to say and have a wake-up moment and realize all the ills they had done and all the wrongs they had committed and have a tableside conversion over brandy after dinner? Probably not. But often the point of speaking truth to power, to those high echelons of power, isn't to necessarily convert the people in positions of power. It is to have a public moment where we can see someone say, "The emperor has no clothes." Because maybe we've been thinking it, and maybe we've been sitting with the discomfort of that idea. And maybe when someone asks us to just be civil, to just disengage, maybe we take that to heart to avoid some of the discomfort, but maybe we're sitting on the fence about it. And in there is the power that is actually being spoken to. There is the power that is being spoken truth to. It's not the high echelons of power. It is the grand power that sits in that mushy middle that has disengaged, that has decided to just be polite for politeness' sake, has decided to not talk about politics or religion because it might lead to uncomfortable conversations. But the more and more that the rules of civility are dismantled day after day after day, the discomfort with that just grows greater, and they need to hear somebody say it just to tip that first domino. We are being lied to. People are making profit off of this chaos. And maybe the people in that center of power, the ones who have disengaged, feel a little more confidence and a little more courage to lean into that discomfort just a little bit more. So maybe they can add their voice to that troop of clowns out on the street with their red noses, telling hard truths in ways that can be heard. That is the first and primary power of ridicule in the public square. And the second one is this. There's a concept called the Hecklers Veto. In law, it has a very specific definition. It means that the government is so nervous about how the mob is going to react to what somebody is about to say, that there might be violence, that they decide to curtail your freedom of speech. It happens a lot. And the court rulings on that particular behavior are ambiguous at best. But in a more popular sense, the Hecklers Veto is just this. We got together and dressed up as clowns and made fun of your horrible, horrible idea to the point where you just shut up and went away. And in uncivil times, that is such a necessity. I know it sounds maybe like I am talking about curtailing someone's right to free speech, curtailing someone's right to express their deeply held belief in the public square. But folks, when that deeply held belief is centered on a principle of the annihilation of somebody else, a whole class of people, simply for who they are, those people have disinvited themselves from the debate. They have not earned admission into the public square. And they should be vetoed. And they should be shouted down. Not because we hate them, but because the idea is abominable. And its presence in the public square angers us greatly. Which brings me back to the red hen. A lot of people argued after Sarah Huckabee Sanders was disinvited from eating at the restaurant that that was no different from a baker in Colorado refusing to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. And on the surface, that argument sounds pretty good. Yes, both people have been refused service. Maybe we are being a little hypocritical. And yet, a high percentage of the cooks and the waitstaff at the Red Hen are lesbian, gay, transgender. And the reason for their discomfort serving Sarah Huckabee Sanders that day, one, was because of the continual string of lies, and two, because of who she represented in that moment and the imminent danger that it was at least implied, if not explicit, to their life and their well-being because of who they were, because of their essence. And they did not want to give that a plate of cheese. Probably understandable. Not because they hated Sanders, but they were terrified of what she stood for. In Colorado, a cake was refused to someone on the basis of who they were. In Virginia, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was denied service for what she had done. And that is the difference. That is how we survive with our ideals intact in uncivil times. We focus on the deeds and not the innate humanity of the person committing them. Adam Gopnik, in the New Yorker not long after the Redhead incident, wrote an article about Sarah Huckabee Sanders and the Red Hen and who gets to sit at the table. That's his question. The academics, he writes, have a word for it. commensality. It describes the practice that determines who eats with whom at the table, who has a place, who doesn't have a place, and how instinctively and traditionally the rules and rituals of sharing food get made. Oddly enough, it's a field that has gotten extra attention in the past decade or two as the study of the social anthropology of eating has become almost scholarly mania. Nothing is more fundamental to human relations than deciding who has a place at the table, and nothing is more essential to our idea of humanism than expanding that table, symbolically and actually, adding extra chairs and places and settings as we can. Jesus, at least as he is reported or invented by the author of the Gospel of Mark, was the Kropotkin of commensality, blowing up the long history of Jewish food rules by feasting with publicans and tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners of all kinds. It was nearly the whole point of his ministry. He ends this article after talking about the problems of Sarah Huckabee Sanders and what she represents with the question we have been struggling with here. What about civility, he asks. Well, fundamental to and the governing the practice of civility is the principle of reciprocity, he writes. Your place at my table implies my place at yours. Conservatives and liberals, right-wingers and left-wingers, Jews and Muslims and Christians and socialists and round and flat earthers all should have a place at any table and be welcome to sit where they like. On the other hand, someone who's decided to make it her public role to extend with a blizzard of falsehoods the words of a pathological liar and to support with pretended piety the acts of a public person of unparalleled personal cruelty, well, that person has asked us in advance to exclude her from our common meal. You cannot spit in the plates and then demand your dinner. The best way to receive civility at night is to not assault it all day long. But there's one thing I want you to leave here this morning. It is this notion that our incivility, our dissent, our resistance to the dismantling of civility, to the dismantling of our ideals, is not about hatred for any one person, but anger and dismay over the actions that are being taken. And that in constructive use of that anger, we are not asking for the annihilation of a person. We are simply asking them to take a time out from the dinner table for a little bit. Think about what you've done. Your chair will still be here when you're ready to come back and apologize and tell us what it is that you got wrong. The widening of that table, the expansion of that table, that is our ideal here. That is our Unitarian Universalist call to make more room, regardless of who is coming to the table. There's room at the table for everyone, as one of my favorite worship songs says. But sometimes you got to ask someone to step away for a little bit. Sometimes you might have to be a little funny about it. Sometimes the comedy might have to be a little mean. Is that uncivil? Maybe. Is it cruel? Perhaps. But I think it's a tough love in service of eventually building that bigger table. It's an incivility that eventually works its way back round to a broader civility, a new set of rules for how we finally build that community we were supposed to be building in the first place before people started tearing the bricks down. Laugh at them again and again. It won't hurt, and it might just help. Maybe so.